She walked in unnoticed and left them speechless. But what Helen Carter did on that mat will make you question everything you think you know about strength. Watch till the end, and tell us, have you ever been underestimated too? The Iron Circle Gym sat tucked between two high-rise towers on a busy corner in downtown Seattle, all steel framing and glass walls that gleamed under the overcast afternoon sky. It wasn't the sort of place where you slipped in unnoticed. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Bass-heavy music thudded softly beneath the echo of sneakers squeaking on mats, and the low hum of male voices filled with casual swagger. Most of the students were young, well-off, and confident, with designer jis lined with patches from regional tournaments and matching duffel bags tossed carelessly along the wall. A giant neon sign blinked above the mat. No excuses, just tap. The slogan suited the place. Fast, brash, and proudly unforgiving. That was the moment Helen Carter walked in. She was 42, tall and slender, carrying herself with a stillness that didn't demand attention but seemed to hold its own space. Her GI was white, crisp, and without a single mark of branding. Her long brown hair was pulled into a simple braid, and a canvas gym bag hung from her shoulder, faded and unassuming. She didn't look around or introduce herself. She just stepped through the door, slipped off her sandals, and bowed quietly at the edge of the mat, her movements fluid and respectful. But in a room where presence usually came with volume, Helen's silence was louder than most. A few students noticed, a smirk here, a nudge there. "White belt?" one whispered. "Probably someone's mom," another chuckled. Coach Rick Dawson, who ran the place like a stage, glanced over with mild curiosity. He was used to people showing up loud or eager. But this woman, she was just still. And in that moment, before a single move was made, the room decided what it thought she was. But Helen Carter had not come for their approval. Coach Rick Dawson was in the middle of a warm-up drill when he decided to make an example out of her. With a dramatic clap of his hands, he raised his voice so that everyone, students, assistants, even those lounging along the wall, could hear. "Well now, look who wandered in," he said with a grin. "You looking for the yoga class, ma'am?" The laughter came easy and loud, echoing off the padded walls. Helen didn't react. She simply looked up, met his gaze calmly, and replied, "Just observing." Her voice was low, steady, and unbothered. That alone seemed to irritate him more than a sharp reply ever could. Rick walked over, eyeing her GI with a theatrical scoff. "Black belt, huh? Cute. Amazon's cosplay section is getting better every year." More laughter followed. Helen didn't flinch. Then someone from the back muttered, "Let her demo with Bobby. Good content." And just like that, it turned into a show. Rick clapped again. "Perfect timing," he said. "We're just about to run a little side control escape drill." He gestured for Helen to step onto the mat. "You can help us demonstrate." There was no invitation in his voice, only command. She stood, bowed respectfully, and walked onto the mat. She didn't argue when Rick handed her a stiff, oversized white belt pulled from a pile of extras. She simply removed her own, folded it neatly with her gi top, and set it down next to her canvas bag. She slipped into the borrowed gi Rick offered, one that sagged awkwardly around her shoulders and dragged past her wrists, and tied the white belt around her waist with practiced hands. No complaint, no resistance, just readiness. Her partner, Bobby Mills, was already adjusting his cuffs and cracking his knuckles. Bobby was younger, full of himself, and always a little too eager for the camera. His black GI was fitted, sharp, and loud with sponsor logos. He bowed lazily toward Helen, glancing toward the phones now tilted in their direction. "Don't blink," someone joked from the sideline. "This won't take long." The match began. Bobby let Helen take grips on his sleeve and collar before sweeping her legs out from under her with casual ease. She hit the mat hard. The crowd roared. Bobby strutted back to reset. Helen got up without a word, bowed, reset, ready again. She hadn't landed a single thing, and not one person expected her to. The match continued like a bad theater production with a crowd too eager to laugh. Bobby kept the pace light, cocky even, tossing Helen again and again with exaggerated flair. Each move meant less to display technique and more to entertain the spectators. Every time she hit the mat, the laughter grew louder, the voices bolder. "She doesn't even know how to fall," someone muttered, while another whispered, "I think she really thought she could keep up." Rick, standing near the edge like a proud ringmaster, narrated with smug energy, turning every exchange into a joke at her expense. "Patience, folks," he called out. "We're building character today." Helen said nothing. She stood each time, bowed with quiet consistency, and reset. Her expression never changed, still, focused and unreadable. But if someone had been truly watching, not just looking, they might have noticed the slight adjustments. Her foot placement grew more exact with each reset. Her grips became more deliberate, her balance more rooted. She began to move differently, not with speed or aggression, but with control. Helen wasn't just enduring, she was studying. She let Bobby go through the motions, allowed his showmanship to take center stage, while she learned the rhythm of his movements like a musician reading sheet music. When he tried a sacrifice throw to get another cheer, she rolled out of it neatly and returned to her knees with a swiftness that caught even Bobby off guard. For a moment, he frowned, but covered it with another grin and played it off with a theatrical shrug. "She's flexible," he joked. "Must be all that Pilates." More chuckles. But Rick narrowed his eyes just a bit, his grin slipping, the edge of control starting to thin. Helen continued to reset, her breath even, her hands loose, her eyes tracking every step Bobby took. She wasn't reacting emotionally. She was reading the match, cataloging the tempo. With each takedown she absorbed, she returned faster, calmer. She didn't resist. She adapted. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, now felt heavier, as though it carried something no one could name. The borrowed gi still sagged awkwardly, and the white belt remained at her waist, but the illusion was beginning to crack. The crowd hadn't noticed it yet. Not fully. But something in the air shifted. The rhythm was no longer Bobby's alone. It was being shared, subtly, silently. And in that shared space, Helen was starting to move like someone with purpose, not to win over the crowd, not to prove anyone wrong, but to reclaim something that had always been hers. It happened so quickly that most of the room missed the beginning of it. Bobby, grinning and flushed with confidence, decided it was time to end the demo with a little flair, something flashy for the cameras, something he could turn into another clip for his online followers. He moved in with a wide, sweeping motion meant to draw attention. His plan was simple: fake a sweep, spin around, and finish with a bow. But as he reached for Helen's collar, her body shifted, quietly, efficiently. Her right foot pressed softly against his knee, while her left leg cut across his thigh in perfect timing. The scissor sweep landed clean. Bobby's base collapsed beneath him, and he hit the mat hard, eyes wide with surprise. The laughter died immediately. For a heartbeat, no one said a thing. Phones that had once captured her falling now trembled in hands unsure whether to keep recording. Helen didn't pause. She moved in like water, flowing over Bobby's hips and settling into mount, her knees tight to his ribs, her weight low and controlled. Bobby tried to bridge, thrashing upward with force, but Helen adjusted smoothly, letting his energy carry him exactly where she wanted. When he turned to his side to escape, she slipped under his arm, took his back, and in one seamless motion set the hooks and slid her arm across his collar. It wasn't brute strength. It wasn't aggression. It was technique so refined it looked like instinct. Bobby's arms flailed for a moment, then slowed as the pressure built, not a choke meant to crush but to restrict, to control. His lungs began to strain. He tapped, 3 times, fast and clear, on her forearm. Helen released the hold the moment she felt it. Bobby dropped flat to the mat, chest rising in short, stunned breaths, his eyes fixed on nothing. The silence in the room was profound. No jokes, no cheers, no commentary. Helen sat back on her heels, bowed toward Bobby without a trace of gloating, then stood and walked calmly to the edge of the mat. Her own GI sat folded beside her canvas bag, and her black belt, still untouched, rested quietly on top. She reached down, picked it up, and tied it around her waist with the same precise motion she had repeated for years. The belt was frayed at the edges, the fabric soft with time, and yet it held firm. She bowed to the room, then resumed her seat, hands resting gently on her thighs, gaze forward. No applause followed. The mat that had laughed at her now said nothing at all. And in that silence, something changed. Helen Carter had not raised her voice. She had not defended herself with words. She had let her movement speak, and in doing so she reminded them all what mastery truly looked like. Up in the quiet of her small apartment, the ceiling fan rotated in lazy circles, slicing the still air with a soft hum that barely cut through the silence. Helen Carter stood in front of the mirror, dressed in her familiar white gi now wrapped snugly around her frame, her hands gently tying the faded black belt with steady fingers. The fabric, once stiff and bright, had softened with time, worn at the edges but strong, much like Helen herself. She looked into the mirror and saw not just her reflection, but everything that had brought her to this moment. Her cheeks were hollowed slightly from long days and longer nights, and her eyes held the kind of quiet that comes only from enduring, not from age. Beside the mirror sat a modest wooden desk, its surface neatly arranged. There, leaning against the wall, was a photograph in a silver frame, a captured memory of two women smiling in matching hospital scrubs. One was Helen, younger and sturdier. The other was her sister, Anna, radiant and laughing, unaware of the cruel road ahead. Tucked behind the photo was a tournament poster from the Gracie Cup of 2019. The colors had faded slightly, but her name remained clear at the bottom corner: Helen Carter, champion. The image of her on the podium came to her now with clarity, barefoot, calm, clutching the medal while the crowd had already moved on. After the matches, her coach, Master Carlos, had approached her quietly when no one was watching. He didn't smile, he didn't congratulate. He placed the black belt in her hands and said simply, "Not for victory, but for how you move when no one's watching." She had bowed to him without a word. There had been no photos, no ceremony, just understanding. She left Sao Paulo the next morning, but it wasn't for celebration. As she exited the venue, her phone rang. Anna had collapsed at the clinic. The diagnosis came swiftly: stage 4. Without hesitation, Helen canceled everything. She withdrew from every match, declined interviews, disappeared from the circuit. She didn't post a farewell, she didn't explain, she just went home. For the next 2 years, she learned a new kind of discipline, one not earned through sparring, but through caregiving. Mornings began with medications, not training. Her GI remained untouched, folded carefully in the closet. Her belt coiled gently in the drawer beside Anna's bed. When Anna passed, the silence that filled their home was heavy, not from grief alone, but from the absence of movement. And then one morning, while reaching for socks, Helen found her hand closing around the GI. She lifted it slowly, pressed it to her face, and breathed in the faint scent of eucalyptus and old sweat. Her fingers didn't tremble. She didn't know why she was holding it, but she knew it was time. Not to fight, not to win, just to move. Not long after, she boarded a flight west, not to rejoin her team or revive her past, but to begin quietly again. Los Angeles was unfamiliar, and yet it didn't ask questions. 4 blocks from the hospital where Anna had spent her final weeks stood a studio she passed often while running errands. One day, without much thought, she walked in. She hadn't spoken to anyone. She hadn't planned to spar. She just wanted to feel the mat under her feet. And now, looking back at herself in the mirror, belt tied, breath steady, Helen didn't see someone returning for glory. She saw a woman who had never really left, only waited until the stillness inside her was ready to move again. Inside the dojo, the chatter had faded into an uneasy quiet. Helen's final sweep had left Marco sprawled on the mat, his chest rising in shallow bursts, his ego far more bruised than his ribs. No one moved. No one. No one clapped. Even Kaido, the ever-confident instructor with the booming voice, seemed frozen in place, his mouth slightly open as though trying to formulate a sentence that simply wouldn't come. The playlist that had once blasted motivational bass had been paused since Helen's first fall, and now, no one dared press play. Helen didn't speak. She simply stepped off the mat, her movements calm, methodical. She bowed to Marco with the same respect she'd shown him before the match began. No triumph, no gloating, just dignity. Then she walked over to the bench, folded the oversized guest gi, and retrieved her own crisp uniform. The belt she had earned long ago was already tied securely at her waist, and it remained there, not as a statement but as a return to center. Her presence had changed. Not louder, but deeper, more rooted. Marco, still kneeling, watched her from the corner of his eye but said nothing. Kaido, clipboard in hand, gave a forced clap. "Good energy today," he said, his tone too cheerful, too hollow. "Strong lessons. Remember, we're all here to learn." No one responded. A blue belt near the back pulled out his phone instinctively, then paused as he watched the footage of the match. He slowed it down, narrowed his eyes, and traced the moment, 4 minutes and 20 seconds in, when Helen had shifted her base. Another student leaned in beside him. "That sweep. That was no accident," he murmured. "That was textbook." The room began to ripple with quiet realization. Phones once used to record her defeat were now searching for her name. It didn't take long. Helen Carter. Former Gracie Cup champion. A name whispered, then spoken with cautious respect. One brown belt, previously silent, walked past Kaido and gave Helen a slight bow as he passed. He didn't speak, but the gesture rang louder than any applause. And Helen? She remained seated at the edge of the mat, posture poised, gaze steady. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't sought recognition, yet the atmosphere had changed entirely around her. One white belt, barely a teenager, asked in a soft voice, "Why wasn't she introduced?" No one answered. Not Kaido, not Marco, not the other students who had once snickered. They all just stared at the mat, seeing it now not as a stage for performance, but a space where something real had unfolded, something undeniable. Helen rose, adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, and walked to the door. There was no dramatic exit, no slamming, no music. Just a soft hush that followed her out like a tide retreating. And inside, for the first time that day, the mat remained still, untouched, open, changed. The slogans painted on the walls about grit and hustle now looked more like noise than truth, because real discipline had just walked out, and no one who had seen her could pretend otherwise. 2 weeks later, inside the back office of Titan Vale Dojo, the soft hum of a desktop computer was the only sound. David, the dojo's administrator, sipped lukewarm coffee as he scrolled through the affiliate system, reviewing routine instructor updates and waiver forms. He had done this 1,000 times before. Click, skim, file. But today, a red alert blinked at the top of his screen. It read, "Unregistered black belt appearance. Callous lineage." His brows drew together. Must be a clerical mistake, he thought. When he clicked, the file that opened made his hand freeze on the mouse. It wasn't an error. It was footage. Certified. Time-stamped. Metadata pulled from Sao Paulo. The name on the file, HC031. The clip showed a yellow mat, the same technique, the same scissor sweep, the same woman. A certification bore the seal of Mestre Carlos Carlos himself. The file wasn't labeled sparring. It was tagged as instructional material. Another alert appeared almost immediately. Visitor rank exceeds registered head instructor. In the system, Kaido's credentials froze mid-query. A new message auto-generated to the regional board. Advisor H. Carter. Status discrepancy urgent. David adjusted his glasses, his heart beating faster. Upstairs, the evening class had just ended. Marco leaned against the wall, sweat drying along his neck, trying to blend into the shadows. A junior instructor leaned in and whispered, "She's listed as Callus's international advisor, 3rd degree." Marco didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. His face didn't change, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed the churn inside. Back in the training room, Helen's name wasn't spoken aloud, but something had shifted. The instructor roster had been updated. The old names remained, written in permanent marker. But at the bottom, in soft pencil, someone had added, "Visiting Advisor, H. Carter, confirmed." It wasn't circled, it wasn't bold, but no one erased it. Outside, in a quiet park tucked between office buildings, Helen sat on a bench under the bare limbs of a sycamore. Her bag rested beside her, one strap curled like a sleeping hand. Across the way, through the open windows of a rec center, children practiced sloppy takedowns and off-balance stances. She watched, motionless, as a flyer drifted across the concrete. It read, "Women's Self-Defense Workshop, Sundays 10 a.m. She folded it gently and tucked it into her bag. Then, with the same quiet strength that had marked her every movement, Helen stood and walked on, leaving nothing behind but a silence that spoke louder than applause. If this story moved you, if Helen's quiet strength reminded you of someone you know or stirred something in you that's been waiting patiently to rise, don't let it pass. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity doesn't need noise to be powerful. Subscribe for more stories that honor resilience, respect, and the quiet moments that shift the world. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever been underestimated? What did you do next?